Lori here. I'm back. I just wanted to do part one of my October reading wrap up. I had a pretty incredible reading month in the month of October, and going back, I realized that I didn't actually review all the videos that I wound up reading in September because I wound up finishing some books at the end of September. So I'm going to talk about those first, and I'm probably going to split this video into like two parts. But yeah, let's get into it. Talk about 10 books that I read before I did all my readathons for the month. And my next wrap up will be about the rest of the books that I read. So each book will have about 10 books in it, just so I don't overwhelm you guys with information. That I wound up finishing at the end of September was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. I enjoyed this conclusion. I really liked it, but I still say that I'm probably like, it's a minority opinion, but my favorite book in this series was definitely Tower of Dawn, which is this book previous. And I think the reason that is because I have been listening to the audiobooks and I enjoyed the simpler plot. But I really did like how that book wound up. I really enjoyed it. I loved how all the characters came together. And I just loved the plot. I thought it was a very well crafted book. I think there was a nice balance between fan service, but also a good storytelling. I thought it was a quick paced story. I really like seeing where Selena went in it and seeing how all the other characters really stepped up to the plate. I was really excited to read it. I'm really excited to read her adult novel, Crescent City. And I still have to dive back into the other series because I did read book one and I just didn't love it. But I wound up giving this 4.75 stars. At the tail end of the month, I talked about this in my reading wrap-up, but I didn't review it, was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Matterhorn. This is the book that I got at BEA last year, and I also wound up meeting the author at Epic Reads Day. Guys, I really love this book. I gave this book 5 stars. It was such a solid read. It's a historical fiction book following witches and witch hunters set in Paris, I think. I think it's Paris. But it basically follows this witch who winds up having to unexpectedly marry a witch hunter. And you have a cast of witches and a witch hunter. And it was just so good. I really enjoyed it. I thought the pacing was really interesting. It was a book that I flew through. Really loved the main characters. And I loved the fake marriage trope in regards to these characters. I just thought it was so well done. I really loved the romance that developed between this book. Definitely love to hate, I'll say that. I thought the setting was so fascinating. I thought the world building was on point. And it just really made me happy. This book was one that I really flew through and I was so happy to read it. I thought she had very rich writing that was very compelling, but it wasn't too flowery. But yeah, I really love the cast of characters. I thought that they were so cool. There was this was a bigger cast of characters that I normally like. But yeah, it was just so fun to read, and I just really wound up enjoying it. I am definitely going to be reading book 2 when it comes out because she definitely impressed me. This was one of my few 5-star rates of September, but thoroughly enjoyed it. Order of these books that I physically read them is totally different than my Goodreads order because I put them in after New York City Comic Con, so it's definitely a little bit wonky. So if you go back and watch my reading vlogs, these books are totally out of order, but that's okay. The next book that I definitely read, I remember reading it during Comic Con, was Time Sight by Lynn Joel. Middle grade book that I think my friend picked up for me from ALA last summer, I think. And it basically was this fantasy adventure story that deals with time travel, follows these 2 young boys, and their dad has to go off to save their mother, and they're sent to go live with a family that lives in Scotland, and they wind up getting sucked into a time warp trying to solve the problems in these other lands. And it was just so fun. It was a really fun adventure story. I will admit, it's definitely a longer middle grade story, and I felt like you weren't always sure what part of the timeline you were really in, what land you were in. So the world building, I think, I needed to be a little bit stronger, especially for younger kids. But I just thought it was really enjoyable. It was a fun adventure story, and I really liked all the time settings that we got. I really liked the main characters, and it was definitely a quick read for me. So I ended up giving this read 3 stars. The next read that I wound up reading, and I recall reading this one specifically during Comic-Con because I was looking for fast-paced reads, was Rumi by Christina Lauren. Is not really my chosen genre, but I've realized when I'm on traveling or doing conventions, I like to have quicker, fast-paced reads because I tend to be online a lot and I just want to read while I'm doing nothing. So this book was, I'm going to talk about the other one because overall I preferred that book a little bit more, but the end really bothered me. But this one, I didn't feel as connected to the main characters. Follows these 2 characters, and the girl's brother is basically the Lin-Manuel Miranda of the Broadway music world. And his show is kind of in a precarious situation, and his little sister winds up finding him a new a musician to take over for the role that they need. Little does everyone know, Calvin, this young gentleman, is here illegally. So they have to wind up getting fake married so he can not only stay in the country, but wind up being in this show. Hilarity, romance, and a whole lot of drama ensues, and that's basically the premise of Rumi's by Christina Lauren. I did like this book, but I didn't feel as connected to the characters as I did. I liked the setting. I thought the setting of like the Broadway world was really interesting, and as a Broadway nerd myself and a theater teacher, I really liked those elements, but I just didn't feel as connected to the characters, and the ending, both endings of both books, I just didn't love, so I wound up giving this one 3 stars overall. The next book that I wound up completing was Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. This is the book that I have really conflicting feelings about, because if you would have asked me like 50 pages before the end of the book, I would have given this a solid 4-star rating because I really enjoyed it. Basically follows these 2 characters, Josh and Hazel. They wind up meeting several years after they first met, and they wind up basically becoming best friends, and they wind up having some encounters together. And it's basically a romance book, but the whole book they're basically spent not dating each other. But I thought the characters were great. I love the plot. Hazel was an elementary school teacher. I really liked Josh. I thought that they were so well done. The ending kind of ruined the book for me, though, I'll be really honest. I didn't like the ending at all. And I thought that, like, honestly, the ending was like 2 stars, but the rest of the book was a 4-star read. So I struggled with the endings of their books. Their endings were kind of like abrupt, both of them that I read. I'm hoping that the other ones might change a little bit and they may not be as abrupt, but they just didn't seem as seamless as other romance books I've read in the past. So I really wanted to love this book, and the reason I don't have them is because I gave them away to a couple of friends. But yeah, so I ended up giving this book overall 3 stars, but the ending just was not my favorite. The next book that I wound up reading was the short story collection, The Queens of Fenburn by Kendra Blake, which is 2 stories set. I was told to read it before book 3 in that series, and that's what I wound up doing. I remember I read this book the day before I went to New York City Comic-Con because it was really, really short. So this anthology or short story collection was broken into 2 stories, The Oracle Queen and The Young Queens. I really, really loved the Young Queen story. I thought it was so well done. I love seeing these characters as young kids, and you got a lot of like background information about them. And the reason I don't have this is I wound up giving this book away because I don't think I would necessarily reread it again. The Oracle Queen I struggled a little bit with because I kind of knew the ending going into it, and there was a big shock. I will admit there was a big shock at the end of that story. But I just struggled knowing, I was like, well, I know what's going to happen in this book. And then I was kind of proven right. So it wasn't my favorite, but I do admit that it was a nice background information for that story that I wound up really liking. I definitely am going to read 2 Dark Reigns before the end of the year. I'm going to make a video shortly about what are the top 5 books I want to finish before the end of the year, and that is going to be high on that list. But yeah, I wound up giving it 3 stars. I kind of sometimes struggle with short story collections sometimes. This one was okay. It wasn't my favorite, but I thought it was good refresher information for when I do dive back into Two Dark Reigns. So, 3-star read. The next book that I wound up finishing reading was Sisters of Shadow and Light by Sarah B. Larson. I actually won this from a Goodreads, I think a Twitter giveaway actually, from the publisher. And I went in kind of not knowing what to expect. But I will admit, along with Serpent and Dove, this book really surprised me. And it also changed the game of how this story was told pretty dramatically, which I like. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of when structures change in the middle of a book, but this one surprised me. So basically, it follows these two characters, Zanara and Anara, and they're sisters, and they lived trapped in this mansion. And the reason that they're trapped in this mansion is that the outside of their house is like covered with greenery, like they can't leave. The only way they can leave is if the foliage lets them leave. And it's these two characters with their mother and a servant. And one of the sisters is Anara, I think. Anara. Oh no. Who? Zuara is the sister that is trying to help her sister. And while her sister, Anara, is basically she can't do anything. She can't understand anything. She can't speak really. And that's because she has a ringing in her ears that doesn't let her hear anything. And she's unable to communicate. It's really, really difficult for her. And basically her sister is stuck alone with her mom, who is really withdrawn since her dad wound up leaving. And they just don't know whatever happened to their dad. I'm doing a really, really bad explaining this book. But that all changes when someone winds up coming into their house and kind of changing the game. I really love this book. I loved how this book's dynamics changed. I really love the characters. I said in an earlier book, I didn't like books that had such small cast of characters because I felt like it was harder to get emotionally connected. However, this book did surprise me. This book is a book that I would say you can read the back because it doesn't spoil anything and you're gonna probably not know a lot going in. But it was such a refreshing read. I really loved it. I thought the ending was a little bit rushed and I wanted a little bit more. But I really am dying for book 2 and I was really impressed. I thought it was really interesting how they handled the characters' relationship and I really loved it. I don't want to tell you too much, but if you're looking for books that have kind of a creepy setting, this would be a great winter read because it's set in a weird castle and there's elements of Narnia as well or different worlds that I really liked. Really, really enjoyed it. So I wound up giving this 4.75 stars and I'm dying for the sequel. Now, I don't know if this was because I just came home from New York City Comic-Con and my brain was kind of fried, but the next book I picked up was one of my lowest rated reads of the year and I feel like I should at least review it and tell you guys my thoughts, and that is The Babysitter's Coven. This book was pitched to me as The Babysitter's Club meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I love The Babysitter's Club, and I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I was like, okay, good, this will be great. However, it really didn't catch either of those marks. The Babysitter Club aspects of this book was not that great. I thought it was an attempt to be the Babysitter Club, but really not the Babysitter's Club. And the world building for how this world was like Buffy the Vampire Slayer came so late into the book that I kept waiting for this reveal to happen, but it just never happened. And then by the time it did happen, so many other things had happened that I was like, wait, what's going on? And then the end of the book just did not make sense to me. So I wound up giving this a 2-star read. I know they were trying to set up the world, but they did it very, very awkwardly, I thought, and it just wasn't a clear world building. They didn't set up the world very good. I wasn't invested in the characters. The friendship dynamics in this book was a little bit weird. And it just was weird. It was not my favorite book. I thought the plot was weird. The characters I didn't feel emotionally invested in. And yeah, so I wound up giving this 2 stars, 2.5 stars. There was one section of this book that I was so game for, towards the end of the book, the middle of the book. And then that part totally went away. I just wanted the characters to be more likable and I wanted the story to be more coherent and I just didn't have that in this book. So yeah, this is definitely one of my lowest rated reads of the year, by far. But yeah, so that's my thoughts. Let me know if you've read it and have had other opinions. But for me, this book did not really work. So the next book I'm going to chat about in this video is Keeper of the Lost Cities Never Seen by Shannon Messenger. I was really concerned going into this book, but there was a big change at the end of Everblaze, and we got a totally new setting, a bunch of new characters, and one prediction I had totally came true. So I think I prefer the pacing of the previous book to this, but I don't want to give too much away. But I love Shannon Messenger's writing style. So well done. I'm really hoping to finish this series before the end of the year or catch up before the end of the year. There was a massive twist at the end of this book that I totally predicted from literally like midway through this book. I really love the new setting. I love how this book really expanded the world. I always connect this book series back to Harry Potter because I think there's so many elements that connect these two series. This book reminds me of like book 4 in the Harry Potter series because it really did expand the world. We learned so much more about the world in that book, and book 5 as well. But I really love the characters in this book. We just get so much information, and I'm just really curious to see where the other books in the series go, and I really hope that Lodestar will be on my November TBR as well. And then the next book that I wound up finishing was an arc that I got from Disney, and it's Nightwalker, Sam Saves the Night by Shari Simpson. This is a book that I wound up picking up kind of on the blue. It was kind of creepy, so I picked it up for Halloween. But it basically follows this girl named Sam, and she deals with chronic sleepwalking. And she really scares her family and her friends because it just gets very, very scary. But she winds up meeting this gentleman who's like a sleep specialist, and she winds up getting approved into his sleep study. And what it does is she kind of detaches her consciousness so she can kind of walk around in the middle of the night as kind of like a ghost. And she meets this cast of characters, and it was just so fun. I'm really excited. I thought it was such a fun, fast-paced adventure story. It dealt with a lot of topics that are so common to my middle school kids, like bullying, not fitting in, friendship. The end was kind of surprising, so I'm really hoping we get a book 2. But I wound up giving this read 3.5 stars. And then the last book I'm going to chat about in this video, because it's right before I started all my creepy reads for the month, was Everless by Sarah Holland. This book was a reread for me, and it was also the book for the Time Warp YA Book Club, and I wound up really liking it. I really remember really liking it the first time that I read it, and I'm fascinated by the world in this book. I thought that this book had so many twists and turns that I really enjoyed. I have heard mixed things about Evermore, but I really love my reread, and I thought it was such a fascinating read, so I'm really excited to dive into Evermore definitely next month. But yeah, that's my thoughts right now on that book, and I'm really excited to complete that series next month. So yeah, those are the 11 books that I wound up reading this month. And I tried to get much better this month at reading creepy books, and that's what you will see in the rest of my TBR. They may not all be spooky, but they're all kind of mystery themed or set on a Halloween theme. But let me know in the comments what are some of your favorite books that you read this part of the month or during the month overall. And I'll talk to you guys later in the week for the rest of the books that I wound up tackling in October. Talk to you guys later. Bye.